Scott sat at the kitchen counter, still processing the surreal events of that morning. Lyana moved around the space like a dancer, her uniform perfectly fitted, hands deftly flipping pancakes while her lavender skin caught the light in ways that made him momentarily forget the chaotic start to their day. "You know," he began, attempting a tone of casual authority. "Most humans would find being used as a body pillow by their housekeeper, well, extremely unusual." Lyana glanced over her shoulder, her sapphire eyes sparkling with amusement. "Most humans, yes, but you are not most humans, Scott, and I am not most housekeepers. We are exploring boundaries, cultural differences, and physiological responses." She tilted her head, studying him like a scientist observing a fascinating experiment. Scott blinked. "Physiological responses, indeed," she replied smoothly. "Your increased heart rate, slight flush, and minute changes in breathing are all indicators of attraction." She paused, letting the word hang in the air like a tantalizing note. "Which I find scientifically fascinating," Scott coughed, suddenly aware of how much he was noticing her, the subtle rise and fall of her chest, the shimmer of her crest as she moved, the scent of alien floral notes mixing with the smell of pancakes. "Lyana, I appreciate cultural explanations, but there's a line. Boundaries, remember, of course," she said, retrieving a plate and placing it before him. "Boundaries are noted, but curiosity is natural, and my people value open acknowledgement. If attraction it is considered healthier than concealment." Scott sighed, taking a bite of the perfectly golden pancakes she had prepared. "I'll admit, these are impressive. Agency level impressive." She smiled faintly, her crest glowing softly. "Thank you. I've been practicing, though your reactions are even more intriguing than the pancakes themselves. Humans have such expressive faces." Scott nearly choked on his syrup. "Lyana, are you analyzing me? Observing?" She corrected gently. "I distinguish between observation and judgment. For example, I noticed you run your hand through your hair when flustered." Scott groaned inwardly, recalling the dozen times he had done exactly that this morning. "Great. Not only am I caught off guard, I'm a subject in your study." Lyana perched on the edge of the counter, crossing her long legs, still radiating the calm confidence of someone entirely in control. "Your behavioral patterns suggest a strong appreciation for honesty and subtle humor. That's valuable for our cultural exchange." Scott tried to keep his focus on the pancakes. "Fine. Cultural exchange. But I think we need a few rules for our personal space." "Agreed," Lyana said, her crest flickering with satisfaction. "Rule 1. Clothing outside private quarters. Rule 2. Knocking before entering private spaces. Rule 3. Respecting sleep schedules and unexpected morning encounters." Scott raised an eyebrow. "Rule 3 is going to take some work." She chuckled, a low, melodic sound that made his chest tighten. "I anticipated as much, which is why I suggest practical exercises." Scott groaned. "Practical exercises, for example," Lyana said, leaning forward, her fingers brushing against the counter inches from his. "We could explore human courtship rituals. You've been teaching me about your species' traditions, but there's still much to observe: direct interactions, gestures, shared meals, and subtle cues of attraction." He felt his pulse spike, but tried to maintain composure. "So, you're saying breakfast is a courtship lesson?" "Partially," she admitted, placing her hands on her hips. "And also a chance for me to test your reactions to unexpected intimacy, like yesterday morning." Her crest flushed a deeper lavender, which you seem to have survived admirably. Scott shook his head, laughing despite himself. "I swear, Lyana, you're impossible. I hire a housekeeper, and suddenly I'm in an interstellar anthropology experiment mixed with whatever that was yesterday." She smiled softly, eyes gleaming. "That's the point. Adaptation is essential to understanding. Cultural immersion requires direct experience, and attraction is part of that experience." Scott swallowed hard, the words stirring something he didn't expect. "So, every gesture, every observation, is part of this study, Not every gesture, she said, tilting her head. Some are genuine, like caring about your comfort, learning your habits, ensuring meals match your preferences. But others are deliberate, controlled to gauge reactions. Scott sipped his coffee, heart hammering. Controlled. So, you were testing me in a sense, she admitted, her crest flickering with amusement. Though I assure you, all tests are harmless. Harmless, he muttered, glancing down at the pancakes. Right? Harmless. Lyana's fingers brushed against his wrist as she handed him a napkin. Scott's heart jumped, the simple contact sending an unexpected shiver down his spine. See? She said, noticing his reaction. Subtle human cues. Elevated heart rate, rapid breathing, all indicators of interest. Scott exhaled sharply. I think we need a pause button. Pause buttons are inefficient, she replied lightly. Understanding comes from immersion, not avoidance. Scott leaned back, defeated but secretly intrigued. Fine, immersion it is, but breakfast is going to remain strictly edible. Lyana chuckled, her crest shimmering softly. Edible and educational. I think you'll find it enlightening. He shook his head, realizing he had no choice but to surrender to the chaos she brought into his life. Lyana, what have I gotten myself into? Her smile widened, warm and teasing, into an interstellar cultural exchange. And perhaps something more, Scott blinked, swallowing hard. Something more, yes, she said simply. Attraction, understanding, and learning to navigate human and ethereal interactions together. The morning sun caught her crest again, making it glow with subtle lavender light. Scott's pulse quickened. Between pancakes, cultural lessons, and undeniable attraction, he realized one thing: his life had officially become far more complicated than he could have imagined, and somehow he didn't mind. Scott Damon's eyes snapped open, the morning sunlight spilling through his bedroom window and hitting him in a way that made his pulse spike. Something heavy pressed against his chest. Groggily, he tried to process what he was feeling, and then his mind registered the impossible. His new housekeeper, Lyana, sprawled across his bare body. Her lavender skin glimmered under the golden rays, smooth and otherworldly, while her crest, a delicate, faintly glowing ridge along her head, rested just below his chin. What the actual? Scott muttered under his breath, heart hammering. Lyana stirred, her large sapphire eyes fluttering open. They locked onto his in mutual shock. A moment later, she rolled off him with fluid grace, despite the obvious embarrassment on her face. By the stars, Mr. Damon. I must apologize, she exclaimed, her melodious voice tinged with genuine distress. This is entirely my fault. I should have explained my species' customs more thoroughly before taking this position. Scott scrambled to sit up, pulling the sheet around his waist. Lyana, I'm going to need one hell of an explanation for this, he said, trying to keep his tone measured despite the whirlwind of emotions flooding him. She perched on the edge of the bed, seemingly unaware of her own nudity. You see, my people, the Etheri, are communal sleepers. We share body heat to conserve energy. It's deeply ingrained in our biology and culture. After finishing my evening duties, I noticed your sleeping form, and well, my instincts took over. She paused, the crest on her head flushing a deeper shade of purple. I should have realized humans might view this differently. Scott ran a hand through his tousled brown hair, struggling to keep his gaze on her face. Despite the absurdity of the situation, he couldn't help but notice how the morning light made her exotic features shimmer, highlighting the delicate patterns on her crest. I must admit, Lyana, he started cautiously, humans generate an impressive amount of body heat. It's quite intoxicating. Her crest rippled, curiosity flashing in her eyes. Different intentions? Scott hesitated. I mean, on Earth, this usually implies mating customs. Oh, her eyes widened with realization. How fascinating. In my culture, we have specific rituals for that. This was purely for warmth, I assure you, she added, a faint smile curling her lips. though your physiological response suggests humans might combine the two concepts. Scott felt his face grow hot. Lyana, you can't just… we need boundaries. Of course, she agreed, finally noticing her own nudity. Gracefully, she retrieved her uniform from a chair. Though I must admit, this has been the most comfortable rest I've had since arriving on Earth. Scott watched her, captivated by the fluidity of her movements. He had hired her through the Interstellar Domestic Services Agency, impressed by her references and the agency's reputation. Now he wondered if he should have asked more questions about potential cultural differences. Lyana, now fully dressed, but still flushed, suggested with a playful tilt of her head, "Perhaps we could discuss these cultural differences over breakfast? I've been practicing human cooking techniques and would like your opinion on something called pancakes." Scott laughed despite himself. Pancakes sound great, but let's establish some ground rules first. Rule number 1. Clothing is mandatory. Outside private quarters, she smiled mischievously. Noted, though, Mr. Damon, she teased. "You're still quite naked yourself," Scott coughed, suddenly aware. "How about you start on those pancakes while I get dressed?" "As you wish," she replied, pausing at the door and glancing back. "Despite this morning, I hope it hasn't made things awkward between us." "No more awkward than finding my alien housekeeper using me as a body pillow," Scott replied with a wry grin. "And please, call me Scott. After this morning, we're past formalities." Lyana's crest rippled, a subtle shimmer of pleasure. "Scott," she said, testing the name on her tongue. "Very well. Though I should warn you, my species forms strong emotional bonds through physical proximity. You might find me becoming rather attached." Before Scott could respond, she slipped out the door, leaving him alone with the lingering warmth where her body had pressed against his. 20 minutes later, Scott entered the kitchen. Now properly dressed, Lyana moved with practiced ease, flipping pancakes expertly. Her uniform hugged her curves, and the domestic scene felt oddly natural despite the bizarre start to the morning. "I hope you like blueberries," she said without turning, sliding a plate in front of him. "Your dietary profile indicated a preference for them. I found some in your stasis unit refrigerator." You read my dietary profile?" Scott asked, sliding onto a bar stool. "Of course," she replied calmly. "The agency provided detailed documentation of your preferences, though I suppose they didn't account for humans. Aversion to communal sleeping arrangements." Scott took a bite, eyes widening in surprise. "Holy, these are amazing." Lyana's crest flushed with pleasure. "I'm glad you approve. I've been studying human cuisine extensively, though my interest in your culture extends beyond food." Her tone made him pause mid-bite. "Human culture?" he echoed. She leaned against the counter, striking blue eyes fixed on him. "I find human mating rituals fascinating, the subtle signals, the tension, the entire dance." Scott swallowed hard. "Am I uncomfortable?" "Not uncomfortable, exactly," he admitted, suddenly very aware of her presence. "My species believes in direct communication about attraction," she continued smoothly. "And you, Scott Damon, are quite attractive." Scott nearly choked on his coffee. "Lyana, you're gorgeous." "Humanly gorgeous," he corrected himself, taking a deep breath. "But we need to maintain professional boundaries." She nodded, though her crest rippled in amusement. "Of course, though I should mention my contract includes potential clauses regarding employer-employee romantic relations. The agency is progressive about interspecies relations. They even put it in the contract. Page 47. Subsection C." Scott laughed, shaking his head. "You really are something else." "Take it as a compliment," she replied, beginning to clean the kitchen. "Now, shall we discuss today's schedule? I understand you want the living space reorganized." "Work first," Scott said, grateful for the change of topic. "Though maybe we should review human customs regarding personal space." "Excellent," Lyana agreed, smiling. "Cultural exchange works both ways, after all." Her playful expression suggested the coming days would be interesting. Very interesting. Scott followed Lyana into the backyard, blinking against the sudden brightness of the mid-morning sun. What had been a modest garden yesterday had been transformed into something straight out of a human romantic comedy, or perhaps an ethereal simulation of one. A checkered blanket was neatly spread on the grass, with a wicker basket beside it. Carefully arranged snacks peeked out, the colors vibrant and inviting. "Scott, welcome to the picnic," Lyana announced, her melodic voice carrying easily across the garden. She settled gracefully on the blanket, her legs folded beneath her, the lavender fabric of her uniform still hugging her curves. "I've prepared several items, Earth-style finger foods with slight modifications to suit your dietary preferences." Scott raised an eyebrow. "You mean everything is edible with one hand?" "Precisely," she said, a faint smile playing across her lips. "You humans have an interesting cultural ritual regarding finger foods. I must observe and participate accurately." Scott chuckled, sliding onto the blanket beside her, trying to keep an appropriate distance while also secretly captivated by her radiant presence. "Well, I appreciate the effort, and I suppose technically this counts as cultural exchange." Lyana nodded, her crest flickering softly. "Correct. It also provides a controlled environment for observing your responses to shared meals. Subtle gestures of interaction and physiological changes in proximity." Scott groaned inwardly. "You are relentless, you know that." She simply laughed, the sound low and melodic. "I am methodical, and curiosity is a virtue among my people. Observe, learn, adapt." He took a tentative bite of a small, neatly folded sandwich. The taste was excellent. Lyana had clearly taken care to balance flavors according to his preferences. "Okay, I'll admit, this is really good. Your enjoyment is noted," she replied, her crest shifting with what he was beginning to recognize as satisfaction. "However, I am also interested in observing subtle human behaviors, eye contact, micro-expressions, hand movements. All of these are informative." Scott rubbed the back of his neck, trying to look casual while simultaneously feeling the heat rise to his cheeks. "You're analyzing me again, aren't you?" "In part," she said, picking up a small piece of fruit and offering it to him. "But consider it mutual observation. You are learning about my species while I study yours." He hesitated, then took the fruit, their fingers brushing briefly. The contact sent a surprising shiver down his spine. Mutual observation, huh? Sounds more like psychological warfare. Lyana's crest flickered in amusement. "Perhaps, but it is productive warfare. Humans often disguise their reactions, yet the body gives away information. Your elevated heart rate, slight flush, and subtle changes in breathing are all data points." Scott groaned, realizing she was right. "So, basically, you're turning me into a living experiment." "Not an experiment," she corrected. "A participant in cultural exchange. Observation is mutual and reciprocal." She leaned back slightly, the sunlight glinting off the delicate patterns on her crest. "And sometimes we learn lessons in subtlety and attraction that transcend mere observation." Scott's eyes followed her movements, noting the way her uniform clung to her form, the smooth motion of her hands as she arranged the snacks. "Lessons in attraction, huh? And this picnic is part of it." "Partially," she admitted, a faint blush coloring her crest. "Partially also a test of your comfort with proximity, shared meals, and controlled intimacy. Observe carefully, Scott. You may find your physiological responses are revealing." Scott blinked, trying to maintain composure. "Controlled intimacy? Lyana, this is getting complicated." She smiled knowingly. "Complexity is part of understanding. Humans are intricate creatures, far more so than my agency briefing suggested, which is why immersion and observation are necessary." He took a deep breath, leaning back against the blanket, secretly delighted by the challenge. "Fine. Immersion. It is. But these tests, they have limits, right?" Her blue eyes met his, direct and unwavering. "Limits are defined by mutual consent and safety, which you may set if necessary." Scott nodded, feeling a strange mixture of relief and disappointment. Good, because I think I might need boundaries. Boundaries acknowledged, Lyana said softly, her crest flickering a gentle lavender. Though I must note, your reaction suggests a strong interest in bending, testing, or exploring those boundaries. Scott groaned. Of course, naturally. Why? Wouldn't they? Lyana leaned closer, her gaze gentle yet intensely observant. Because attraction is complex, Scott. It is intertwined with curiosity, physiological responses, emotional engagement, and cultural misunderstanding. You are human, and I am a theory. We navigate multiple layers of interaction simultaneously. Scott tried to smile, feeling the weight of her words, as much as the warmth of the sun on his back. So, what you're saying is, I'm supposed to enjoy this, while also learning a crash course in a theory culture? Precisely, she replied, offering him another bite of fruit. And note the subtle cues. Eye contact, hand placement, breathing rhythm, micro-expressions, all indicators of attraction. Comfort or discomfort. Your responses guide my next steps. Scott took the fruit, their fingers brushing again, sending a jolt through him that had nothing to do with hunger. You really do analyze everything observable, Lyana said, leaning back on her hands, watching him with a tilt of her head, including the interplay of human humor, sarcasm, and nervous laughter. Fascinating data points, especially when paired with proximity and touch. Scott swallowed hard, suddenly very aware of how close they were sitting. All right, I get it. You're brilliant, methodical, and terrifyingly observant. Her crest flickered with amusement. Observant, yes. Terrifying? Perhaps to those unaccustomed to direct observation. But in practice, it is enlightening. He exhaled, a mix of frustration and intrigue bubbling within him. Enlightening. Sure, that's one word for it. Lyana laughed softly, the sound like chimes in the warm breeze. And you, Scott, are remarkably adaptable. I am encouraged by your willingness to participate in this cultural exchange, even under unusual circumstances. Scott shook his head, smiling despite himself. Unusual circumstances is putting it mildly. But I suppose if I survive this, breakfast with my alien housekeeper might actually be fun. Lyana's crest rippled faintly, a sign he had begun to recognize as pleasure. Fun, understanding, learning, and attraction, all intertwined in a single experience. That is the essence of interspecies exchange. Scott chuckled. I'll try to remember that next time you decide to climb on top of me while I'm sleeping. Her smile widened. Next time, Scott, may involve less surprise and more consent, though the initial encounter will always remain memorable. He groaned, feeling both exasperated and captivated. Memorable? Yes, I'll give you that. They ate in relative silence after that, punctuated by occasional conversation about human customs, her interpretations, and the subtle ways they were learning about each other. Scott found himself laughing at her observations, charmed by her precision and intrigued by the boundaries they were exploring together. By the time the picnic concluded, he realized something. He wasn't just observing her. He wasn't merely participating in her cultural lessons. He was engaged, captivated, and irrevocably drawn to her. And somewhere deep down, he knew this was only the beginning. The morning after the garden picnic, Scott found himself moving through the familiar spaces of his home with a newfound awareness. Every corner, every surface seemed imbued with Lyana's presence. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee lingered in the air, a subtle blend of earth beans and a faint trace of ethereal herbal infusions. He spotted her in the kitchen, efficiently preparing breakfast. Even her movements graceful, fluid, precise, held a certain magnetism he couldn't deny. Her uniform was perfectly arranged, the subtle lavender fabric contrasting with her deep sapphire eyes. Scott felt a familiar rush of awareness and alertness he could no longer ignore. "Good morning, Scott," Lyana said, her voice light yet commanding. "I trust your rest was sufficient." Scott swallowed nervously. Yeah, I slept well, actually. Thanks. He shifted slightly, trying to maintain professional composure, though it was clear he was failing. Her crest flickered with amusement. I am pleased. Observing human sleep patterns provides a wealth of data, though I must note your physiological responses indicate increased alertness in proximity to myself. Scott groaned internally. Right, yes, the proximity thing still there. Lyana's smile widened. It is a natural response, Scott. Humans are highly sensitive to touch, scent, and presence. As I have noted previously, your reactions are informative and predictable in their variability. He rubbed his forehead, feeling the mix of exasperation and fascination wash over him. Informative and predictable? Great. Glad I'm useful. Not just useful, Lyana corrected, handing him a plate of meticulously arranged pancakes. You are an excellent participant in this ongoing cultural exchange. Scott blinked. Pancakes are a cultural exchange. Of course, food is a primary means of connection among humans. Shared meals, attention to flavor, presentation, and ritual all convey social cues, attraction signals, and even subtle emotional intent. He took a deep breath and picked up a fork. Well, in that case, I'm ready for cultural immersion. He took a bite and immediately his eyes widened. Wow, these are incredible. Seriously. Lyana's crest rippled softly in acknowledgement. I am gratified. I have adapted my etheric culinary techniques to complement human taste receptors. This is also a measure of your responses to multisensory input. Scott swallowed, his cheeks heating. Multisensory input? Yes, well noted. I think my responses are enthusiastic. Lyana's eyes sparkled with curiosity, indeed. However, let us also consider the broader implications of shared meals, social bonding, signaling of trust, and mutual evaluation. I observed your micro-expressions as you tasted the pancakes. Fascinating. Scott groaned, lowering his fork. You're watching me eat. In part, she admitted, leaning slightly closer, the scent of her presence enveloping him. Observation is mutual. You observe me preparing, arranging, and presenting food. I observe your reactions. Both parties gain insight into preferences, temperament, and compatibility. Scott laughed despite himself. Compatibility, already? We just had a picnic yesterday. Lyana tilted her head, her crest flickering with curiosity. Compatibility is cumulative. Each interaction adds to the data pool. Your physiological reactions are consistent with previous observations. I can infer levels of attraction, interest, and emotional engagement. He rubbed the back of his neck, suddenly aware of how close she was sitting. Emotional engagement. Right. Got it. Shall we move beyond breakfast? Lyana suggested, rising gracefully. I have prepared a series of tasks within the home to continue the exchange. These will include organization, spatial orientation, and interpersonal observation. Scott blinked. Tasks within my own home? Yes, she said, her crest rippling in amusement. A structured environment allows for focused observation and the application of adaptive techniques. You may learn about etheric organizational principles while I refine my understanding of human habits and preferences. He sighed, following her into the living room. All right, let's do this. Lyana began by rearranging various household items with meticulous precision. Noting Scott's reactions with every movement, she explained each adjustment in detail, from the reasoning behind spatial placement to the cultural significance in etheric homes. Humans prioritize visual aesthetics and functional accessibility, she observed. Yet, there is a subconscious hierarchy of placement, often based on emotional attachment and habitual behavior. Scott watched, fascinated. Despite himself, you really do study everything, don't you? Everything observable, she replied. Your reactions, verbal cues, micro-expressions, even subtle shifts in posture all provide insight into human decision-making processes. He ran a hand through his hair, feeling the familiar heat in his cheeks. I'm starting to feel like a lab rat. Not a lab rat, Lyana corrected, leaning closer to adjust the placement of a small decorative item. A participant. Voluntary, collaborative, and mutually beneficial, Scott chuckled, though he couldn't deny the magnetic pull he felt toward her. Mutually beneficial. Right? I'll take your word for it. After the organizational tasks, Lyana suggested a more interactive exercise. Let us explore shared creativity. I have prepared materials for artistic expression, colors, textures, and forms. Humans use these to communicate emotion, intention, and cultural narrative. Scott raised an eyebrow. Art? Now we're doing art. Yes, she said, her eyes twinkling. It is both instructive and revealing. Observe the way you manipulate. Materials, how you choose colors, and your willingness to experiment. These are all indicators of cognitive style and emotional processing. He shrugged, sitting down on the floor beside her. All right, let's do it. They spent the next hour creating a collaborative piece of tapestry of colors and forms, blending Scott's somewhat chaotic human sensibilities with Lyana's precise, deliberate strokes. Each brush, each pattern was analyzed silently, their unspoken observations exchanged through micro-expressions, glances, and occasional words. Scott found himself laughing more than he had expected, charmed by her meticulous approach and subtle humor. You're surprisingly funny for someone who analyzes everything. Lyana's crest rippled with amusement. And you are surprisingly resilient, Scott. Despite repeated challenges to comfort and expectation, you engage willingly and adaptively. He smiled, feeling the warmth of shared experience. Resilient? Sure. I'll take that. They're artistic. Exercise concluded. Lyana suggested a final task for the morning, a discussion of personal space and boundaries. Humans value spatial autonomy, she noted. Yet proximity can be a sign of trust, attraction, or collaboration. Let us examine this through structured dialogue. Scott raised an eyebrow. Structured dialogue about personal space. Isn't that a little intense? Intensity is instructive, she said softly, sitting across from him on the blanket. Observe your reactions and I will adjust mine. We shall find equilibrium. Scott nodded, trying to suppress the flutter in his chest. Equilibrium. Right, let's do it. For the next hour, they discussed the nuances of physical and emotional boundaries, testing responses with subtle changes in posture, distance, and touch. Scott realized he was learning more about himself than he had in months. How proximity affected his comfort, how attraction influenced his responses, and how trust could be communicated silently. Lyana, for her part, adapted smoothly, noting his reactions and adjusting her own behaviors to match the feedback. Observation, adaptation, and empathy, she murmured, these are key components of successful interspecies interaction. Scott laughed, shaking his head. You make it sound like a science experiment, but it's kind of amazing, yes, she said softly, her gaze meeting his. Amazing, challenging, and mutually enriching. I am glad we engage in this exchange. As the morning waned, they transitioned to lunch, a simpler affair after the intensity of their activities. Scott watched Lyana prepare a meal with fluid precision, her attention to detail both mesmerizing and disarming. You know, he said, leaning back slightly, I didn't expect living with an alien housekeeper to be this intense. Lyana paused, looking up at him with a gentle smile. Intense, yes. Informative, yes. But also meaningful. Each interaction strengthens understanding, trust, and emotional connection. Scott exhaled, feeling the weight of her words. Meaningful. Yeah. I suppose you're right. It's more than just meals and organization. Much more, she agreed, her crest flickering with a soft lavender glow. It is learning to navigate differences, to appreciate perspective, and to honor both species' customs while building something shared. Scott nodded, feeling a warmth that had little to do with the sun. Shared. I like that. I like that a lot. Lyana reached across the table, lightly brushing his hand. As do I, Scott. And now, we prepare for the next phase of cultural exchange, social protocols with extended family. Observation and adaptation will be crucial. Scott swallowed, realizing that the garden picnic, the morning tasks, and the structured exercises had all been preparation for something far more complex. Extended family? Great. Just what I needed. Lyana smiled knowingly. Fear not. We will navigate it together. Trust, empathy, and observation will guide us, Scott exhaled, feeling both dread and anticipation. Together. Right, okay, I can do that. And in that moment, as he watched her delicate fingers brush over the table, adjusting utensils and observing his micro-expressions, Scott understood something crucial. Living with Lyana was more than a cultural experiment, more than a series of lessons. It was an exploration of connection, attraction, and trust, a delicate dance that he was both terrified and exhilarated to continue. As the afternoon sun cast golden rays across the living room, he realized that the complexity, intensity, and subtle lessons of living with Lyana were slowly transforming him, preparing him for challenges and discoveries he had never imagined. And for the first time, Scott felt truly alive to the possibilities of an interspecies connection that was, in every sense, beyond ordinary. Scott spent the morning in a quiet daze, still processing the whirlwind of events that had unfolded over the past weeks. The garden picnic, the home lessons, and the delicate exploration of boundaries with Lyana all culminated in a single truth: life had irrevocably changed. Yet nothing, he realized, could have truly prepared him for what awaited: the formal introduction to Lyana's family, and the ancient ethereal trials that would test both his resolve and his connection. With her, Lyana stood at his side, radiant, in a traditional ethereal ceremonial robe. The diaphanous fabric shimmered in the early sunlight, accentuating her lavender skin and the subtle ripples of her crest. "Are you ready, Scott?" she asked, her voice soft yet firm, a balance of reassurance and challenge. Scott exhaled, gripping the handle of the ceremonial energy blade she had insisted he practice with. "Ready as I'll ever be," he admitted, glancing at the sleek vessel hovering in Earth's orbit, its hull gleaming with chronometric energy. "Though I have a feeling ready might not be enough." Lyana's blue eyes sparkled with amusement. "It is not perfection that matters, Scott. Adaptability, trust, and the bond we share are what will guide you through the trials. Remember what we practiced: the synchronization of movement, observation, and instinct." He nodded, though a flicker of panic crossed his mind. Ritual combat with her father, ceremonial blessings, and the intense scrutiny of the extended family. This was far beyond anything he had ever imagined when hiring an alien housekeeper. And yet, he couldn't deny the thrill that ran through him at the thought of facing these challenges alongside Lyana. The vessel descended with precision, docking at the designated landing zone. Lyana took his hand, their fingers interlacing. Naturally, together, she whispered, and Scott felt the familiar warmth of their bond steady his nerves. Inside, the ethereal family awaited. Lady Mara and High Counselor Vex greeted them with formal nods, their crests glowing in soft, iridescent hues. The chamber radiated authority and tradition, the bioluminescent light casting patterns across the polished floor. Scott felt the weight of expectation pressing upon him, but Lyana's presence grounded him. "Scott Damon," Vex intoned, activating his ceremonial energy blade. "You are here to prove your worthiness, not only to my daughter but to our lineage. Are you prepared to uphold the honor of your bond and face the trials before you?" Scott swallowed hard, gripping his own blade. I am," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. His eyes met Lyana's, and the reassuring warmth of her touch strengthened his resolve. "I will do my best." The first trial ancestral combat began immediately. Vex's movements were precise, his strikes guided by centuries of tradition. Scott mirrored the techniques Lyana had taught him, adjusting his stance, observing subtle shifts in Vex's posture, predicting movements through instinct and their empathic bond. The dance of energy blades was intense, each strike met with careful parries, each movement a blend of caution and trust. Lyana observed from the side, her blue eyes focused and alert. Remember your alignment, Scott. Trust your instincts and anticipate, but do not overextend. Your bond with me will guide your perception of his energy. Scott adjusted, feeling the synchronicity of their connection. With each defensive move, he sensed Lyana's presence, a constant feedback loop of awareness that sharpened his reflexes. Vex's strikes became more complex, weaving patterns that tested not only his physical skill but his emotional composure. Sweat beaded on his brow, but the rhythmic pulse of their empathic bond steadied him, and he began to move with unexpected grace. Suddenly, Vex executed a sweeping combination that forced Scott to vault backward, narrowly avoiding a powerful strike. His heart raced, but Lyana's voice echoed in his mind a gentle reminder of observation, adaptation, and trust. Channeling that focus, Scott responded with precision, anticipating the next sequence and countering effectively. Vex's eyes widened, impressed by the human's adaptability. Remarkable, Vex murmured, adjusting his guard. Your bond with Lyana has indeed enhanced your reflexes. Most candidates fail to synchronize so quickly. Scott exhaled sharply, relief and pride mingling in his chest. He met Lyana's gaze, and her crest rippled in pride. You are performing admirably, she whispered. This is merely the beginning. Focus on alignment and emotional attunement. You will succeed. The trial progressed, each movement a delicate interplay of energy, precision, and trust. Sweat streamed down Scott's face, his muscles screaming, but his focus remained unwavering. With Lyana's guidance and the strength of their bond, he navigated the challenges, countering Vex's strikes with growing confidence. Finally, with a fluid combination of movements, Scott disarmed Vex, bringing the trial to a dramatic but controlled conclusion. The chamber fell silent. Vex's crest glimmered, an expression of approval that resonated through the room. You have proven your worth, Scott Damon, he announced. Not solely through skill, but through adaptability, resilience, and the bond you share with my daughter. Lyana's hands found his, their fingers intertwining. Well done, she murmured. Your dedication, focus, and trust have made this possible. I am proud of you. Before Scott could fully absorb the relief, a new wave of anticipation swept through him. Lyana's pregnancy had accelerated under the stress of the trial, and the family's energy alignment now required their immediate attention. He turned to her, seeing her crest flicker with intensity. Are you okay? He asked, concern overtaking exhaustion. I am, she said, her hand resting on her abdomen. But we must proceed with the ritual of unified creation. Our bond and our child are central to its success. Trust in our connection, Scott. The chamber was transformed, ceremonial lights casting vibrant, bioluminescent patterns. Vex and Lady Mirror assumed their positions, and Scott joined Lyana at the center. Dr. Veron's voice guided them through the process, instructing them on energy synchronization, empathic resonance, and channeling combined bioelectric fields. To support the birthing process, Scott's mind raced, adrenaline and fear mingling with awe. As the ritual commenced, he felt Lyana's pain, determination, and joy through their empathic bond. His own heartbeat aligned with hers, their energy fields intertwining. The room pulsed with life, light, and the merging of two species in a profound, unprecedented act of creation. Hours passed in a blur of coordinated effort, but finally, a cry echoed through the chamber, a perfect blend of human strength and ethereal resonance. Their son had arrived. The infant's skin bore a pale ivory hue with subtle lavender undertones, and tiny crests already displayed the fusion of human and ethereal traits. Scott's breath caught as he held his son, the reality of fatherhood, interspecies connection, and profound responsibility settling over him. Lyana rested against him, her crests glowing with maternal pride. He is perfect, she whispered. Our bond, our child. This is the beginning of something extraordinary. Vex and Lady Mirror approached, their expressions softened. You have proven yourself, Scott Damon, Vex said, through trial, endurance, and devotion. The lineage is honored and the child is welcomed. Scott exhaled, cradling his son. Thank you, all of you, for trusting me, guiding me, and for this, Lyana smiled, brushing his hair back gently. We will navigate the future together, Scott. Our differences, our cultures, and our love will guide us. The chamber quieted, the trials complete. Scott looked at Lyana, their son, and the supportive presence of her family. The whirlwind of challenges, misunderstandings, and intense cultural lessons had brought them to this extraordinary moment. It was not simply a test of skill or endurance, it was the affirmation of connection, trust, and a shared journey that transcended worlds. For the first time, Scott allowed himself to relax, feeling the weight of past fears lift. Life had become unpredictable, extraordinary, and beautiful. And as he held his son close, feeling Lyana's warmth beside him, he realized that the story of their lives was only just beginning, a tale of love, resilience, and interspecies harmony that would define generations to come.